Welcome to Getting to Yes, the video workshop on negotiation. In this program, Roger Fisher, William Ury, and Bruce Patton will show you how to transform adversarial confrontation into side-by-side problem solving.
Hello, I'm Roger Fisher, here with my colleagues Bill Ury and
Hello.
Bruce Patton.
Hello.
Welcome to the video workshop on negotiation. All of us negotiate all the time. You wouldn't be in your present position unless you were a good negotiator. People keep asking us, but isn't negotiation natural ability, not coaching? Once you're good at it, can't you just relax? I compare negotiation skills with those of an athlete. Natural ability is terribly important, but the more natural ability you have, the more you will benefit from coaching, from continuing to learn how to do it better and better. The professional tennis players at Wimbledon bring their coaches with them. They keep learning to get better all their lives.
I like that athletic metaphor. The curious thing that strikes me is that if we negotiate so much of our time with our bosses, our spouses, our peers, our customers, our suppliers, our kids, if we're negotiating, say, 50% of our time, and some people would say 90% of our time, the question I have is, if you were swimming, say, 50% of your time, you'd be in the Olympics. And the question I have is, as good as we all are, why aren't we all in the negotiation Olympics? And I think the answer lies in the fact that when you swim, you always have part of your mind focused on your stroke, on improving your stroke, on improving the process of swimming. When we negotiate, we have almost all of our attention focused on the substance, on the terms and conditions, on the price. Well, what this videotape workshop is about going over the process of negotiation so that we can all be in the negotiation Olympics.
One difficulty we often have is that the more you negotiate, the tendency is to get better and better at less and less. When the stakes are high, we focus on our most confident skills. But that means we get better and better at a few skills and leave others to wither away. We become one-sided, not very flexible or adaptable. Each of us has room to broaden our repertoire of negotiating skills.
And we're not just going to talk about negotiation. Words don't describe adequately what really happens. You're going to be watching a lot of different examples. We're going to be acting in examples, demonstrating what can be done in different kinds of negotiations. Mistakes people make, skills they use. Let's watch the first negotiation.
Mr. Gillum, I've already told you, my position is $14 million. If you want to take the station away from me, that's what it's going to cost you.
Mr. Bryant, our position is $8 million for your share. That's 8 times your share of cash flow. That's fair, that's reasonable. I don't understand where you're coming from.
Well, I get my number $14 million from what I know this station is worth. I'm the one who came in here 5 years ago when it was down and out as number 3 and built it to number 1. I know this station and I know what it's worth, and $14 million is my share of what it's worth. That's what it's going to take.
Your partners have given me 2/3, an option on 2/3 for $16 million. Why is 1/3 worth $14 million?
My partners have not been around here nearly as much as I have. I'm the one who made this station. I really don't care what kind of deal they cut with you. My position is $14 million because that's what I know this station to be worth. If you want to take it away from me, that's what it's going to cost.
$8 million is our position, Mr. Bryant. That's a take it or leave it.
Well, $14 million is my position, and that's a take it or leave it.
Does that negotiating process look familiar? Adversarial, deadlocked, telling each other, not listening very well, not trying to understand where the other side is coming from, not treating the people with a whole lot of respect. There's a chance in negotiation to do it differently. We believe that negotiation would be better off if you can treat it as side-by-side problem solving. Both parties share a problem. They think that a negotiated agreement would be better for both than no agreement. and they share the problem of trying to find an agreement that both can live with, and a good agreement, one that doesn't leave potential joint gains on the table.
This whole video is a way of helping you prepare for negotiations, a way to think about it in an organized way, and a way to realize that in advance of negotiation, you can do a great deal that'll affect the total outcome. You'll thought about where you're going to end up, and therefore you know where to begin.
In other words, we want you to have always part of your mind focused on the process of negotiation, before you go into the negotiation, during the negotiation, and then taking also a few minutes after the negotiation to ask yourself, what went right here? What went wrong? What could I do differently next time? What surprised me? So that you're learning from each negotiation, because you have so much rich experience that if you can tap that experience and turn it into better and better skills, you will end up, as I mentioned, in the negotiation Olympics.
A point we're going to make throughout this workshop, this video, is to give you a big structure, the basic building blocks of negotiation, what they are. Interests, what do you really care about? What do they care about? Options, what are some possible agreements we could have? Let's get the range of what we could agree upon. Standards, how can I persuade them they're being fairly treated? How can they persuade me? How can I persuade myself that I'm being fairly treated and not being ripped off?
People, how do you deal with the people issues in negotiation? And BATNA, what is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement if you can't settle?
Let's begin with segment 1, interests.
Segment 1. Interests.
All too often we approach a negotiation, like that radio station owner and the buyer, almost as if we were two armies approaching each other from opposite sides of a battlefield. We dig into our positions, $14 million, $8 million, we build trenches, fortifications, no one's going to move, each side knowing full well that we're going to have to somehow dig ourselves out of our positions if we're going to get anywhere near the middle. And so what we do is we dig ourselves out and we move about 10 feet and then we dig ourselves in again. I've often wondered why people go through that exercise when the purpose of negotiation is not so much to meet your position, it's to satisfy your underlying interests. And that's perhaps the key distinction in negotiation, is the distinction between what your position is and what your interests are. Your position are the things that you say you want, the concrete things you demand, terms and conditions, dollars and cents, $14 million, $8 million. Your interests are the underlying motivations, the intangible motivations that lead you to take those positions. Your underlying needs, your desires, your concerns, your fears, your aspirations. Those are your interests. In any negotiation, you want to understand your interests. Just as important as understanding your interests is understanding the other side's. Think about it for a moment. What is negotiation? Negotiation is an exercise in influence. You're trying to change someone else's mind. Now, if you're trying to change someone else's mind, the first thing you need to know is where their mind is right now. You need to be able to put yourself in their shoes. That is perhaps the single most important skill in negotiation, is the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes, see the world the way they see it, see what drives them, see what motivates them, so that you can craft a solution that meets their interests and meets yours. The best way to understand the process of getting behind positions for the underlying interests is to see it in action. Let's return to the radio station negotiation and watch Roger prepare the potential buyer for a second meeting with the owner of that station.
Roger, the guy's a mule. He wants $14 million for his share. That's all he wants to talk about. I can't reach him. I don't know what's going on with him.
What do you want? What's the company want here?
The company...
What's the purpose of this negotiation from your point of view?
The company wants the station. It's a good station. We'd like to buy it. It would fit nicely. It's got some profits we could offset against some losses.
You told me you've already got an option on 2/3 of the station from the other owner.
Yeah, I've got to have 80% of the station before I can put the losses and the profits together. I can't do it without 80%.
You need 80% of the station.
80%.
And when you get the station, what do you want of it? What are you going to do with it?
Well, it's a good station. There's no real sense in changing. I'd like to have a good transition, one that doesn't look like we've taken over the station. Want to keep the talent, want to keep the management. Generally, make no waves in the market.
What I'm doing here is looking behind the company's position, $8 million, and the radio station's position, $14 million, for the underlying interests, the concerns that lie behind that. I'm trying to find out what Mr. Gillum wants, what kinds of things he needs, not just wants, but what he really needs to satisfy his concerns. And then we'll look at the other side, what the station owner needs. So you need 80% ownership in order to have the consolidate the books.
That's the number.
And on the operation of the station, what do you need there? What do you want there?
Well, I'd like to have a good operation, a good smooth operation. Basically, what it's been doing.
Let's go talk to him and see if we can find out what his concerns are.
Lots of luck.
You've just seen the most important part of a negotiation, which is the preparation. Most negotiations are won or lost, done well or done poorly, even before the negotiators get to the table, simply in the quality of preparation that they bring to that table. You can't wing it in negotiation. You put yourself at an enormous disadvantage if you do that. Let's watch Roger Fisher use the value of effective preparation to negotiate on behalf of the buyer.
Mr. Bryan, what do you really want out of this situation?
As I've said, I want $14 million. I made that very clear.
What would you do with the money if you had it?
Well, I don't think that's really any of your business.
Fair enough, but I want to understand what you care about, because if we're going to make a deal, it's only with your agreement. It's only a deal you want. What do you want in this station?
What I care about is this station. This is more than just a job for me. It's something that I thoroughly enjoy. I built from the ground up. I feel like I'd be selling one of my children.
In talking with Mr. Gillum, I discovered that what his company really wants in owning the station, they want to own enough of the stations so they can consolidate their books with the other stations that you've got, a number of other radio stations. That means you have to have...
I have to have 80%.
80% ownership, not 100%.
No, I need 80%, but I got to have 80%.
And the two-thirds you have an option on is not enough.
No, I got to buy his share.
See, the fact he doesn't need it all makes me think there may be some possibility of an arrangement here which leaves you with the station.
Well, that 80% is something new. I didn't hear that the first time, but...
No, you want to buy a station. 66% wasn't enough. But what do you, would that meet some of your concerns?
Well, it not really. Because suppose I continue as an owner in a minority position. Sure, that's where I am now. But would I have creative control?
That's another interest. What's that mean, creative control? Why do you do that? You actually decide what programs?
I decide what programs. More importantly, I decide the overall format.
Creative control. What else do you like?
I like the ability to manage the station. I like the ability to participate in its growth.
We got management, participation. Does your company object to such things in other stations?
Roger, it sounds like to me he wants the world. He wants a ton of money, he wants creative control, he wants management, he wants the whole 10 yards.
We're looking at what his interests are. What are your interests? You have no interest in changing management.
Not per se. I have some concerns.
What are they?
Well, I'm not sure that Mr. Bryant and my company get along. He's just said, you know, how big companies operate. If we don't get along, if this station goes in the dumpers, I've got the risk.
Well, what you need an interest there in protection against downside. If the station starts losing money or not doing well, you want some kind of downside protection.
Yes, I need downside protection.
And you wouldn't mind his getting a piece of the action going up if it goes well.
Well, you know, again, I'd have to work with him to find out, you know, how he's going to run this place and get comfortable with him. Right now, we're not doing too well.
Oh, I think you're doing fine. You're disagreeing about money, but let's come back up to the money question. If you bought out half Mr. Bryant's interest right now, you were offering $8 million at 8 times cash flow for his share. Half of that would be $4 million 8 times. Suppose we split the difference between, I'm just not asking for commitments now, just trying to think a little bit. $4.5 million would be 9 times cash flow for a share of interest. And you're not taking the station away from you. You would, as I see this thing, You'd still be the station manager. It's your station. You're still running it. You're an owner of it.
But for how long? I mean, now we've talked about different kinds of contracts, and maybe some of those would work. There might be different triggers in there.
You want a long term.
I want a long term.
And you?
I'd like to have as short as possible.
Why?
He's an unknown to me. You know, we've got some risks in here. We're putting up a ton of money.
He's run the station for 5 years. Well, you know that track record.
The radio station's initial position, as you'll recall, was $14 million. But as the negotiation unfolds, you begin to see what his underlying interests are. He's interested in continuing to be a manager of the station. He wants to remain as an owner of the station. He wants a good price. He wants the ability to make more if the station does well. And he wants to stay in the community. That's the central point, looking behind positions for what are the underlying interests, asking why not, and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Those are the main points we want to leave you with at the end of this segment. The purpose of negotiation is to satisfy your interests and the other side's interests too. Now, the reason you spend so much time probing behind positions for what are the underlying interests is to be able to invent options that satisfy both sides' interests. In the next segment, we're going to look at exactly how you go about the process of inventing those options for mutual gain.
Segment 2, Options.
Focusing on positions not only conceals underlying interests. Positions tend to limit the ways of meeting those interests. An important negotiation activity is to invent various ways in which the underlying interests might be met. If I want to buy a building, I'll say my interest really is using it. Should I lease it? Might I rent it with an option to buy? Might it be a long-term lease or a short-term lease? Might I rent part of it? Might we jointly own it? You want to think of a wide variety of ways of serving those underlying interests. When we say option, we mean a possible agreement or a part of a possible agreement. Something you might do, it could be included in an agreement, it could be a whole framework, but it's not a commitment, it's not a promise. We're exploring what we could do. It's brainstorming. It's generating things that might be included in the outcome of this negotiation. A major feature of negotiation is to explore possible agreements, bits and pieces of agreements, to invent a range of options of what could serve our mutual interests before making any decision. In this next situation, we have a labor negotiation. Bill and Bruce have been retained by the two sides to help facilitate the process, to change them from the rut they're locked into a more constructive activity of generating options.
Frank, you and I have been working together for how long? More years than I care to talk about. And yet in all that period of time of our bargaining, you haven't heard a thing I've said, apparently. For you to come to us with this proposal is to undermine the very foundation of our union. We believe in seniority. You know that as a union, seniority is one of our bedrocks. And yet you come to us with something that jeopardizes the seniority of our men and women. I don't understand you.
You realistically expect me to go back to my people and say, we're going to start training people at the age of 55, 58 to 60, people who are going to retire in a couple of months?
Do you expect us to go back to our people who have been on the job for 20 or 30 years and tell them we want them to have a younger person leapfrog over them, to get better paying jobs, more training?
We're aware of your seniority rules, but we have to find something within the parameters of our living. I mean, you're asking us to go in and say to 30-year-old people who are just starting their career in our industries, say, okay, we're going to forget about you. We're going to train your father and your grandfather. And that's what...
Those people have come into the company and come into the union expecting to be long-term players, expecting to be trained along the way.
The only way they're going to be long-term players is if we're still in business. And the way we're going to stay in business is to stay competitive. And the way
we hear this from you guys every year. You know, you don't have the money to do this, you don't have the money to do that. You told us 5 years ago you didn't have the money to do the training. Now you've got the money to do the training, but you don't want to train the older workers?
If you haven't kept up... I get the sense that you've gone over this before, you've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive, really. I mean, I almost have the sense that you could go on forever.
We do this 9 months out of the year.
Well, in the past that may be. I'm not sure that's the best way for us to spend our time here. I don't know if we're going to spend 9 months and, get anywhere.
In fact, there are two ways to talk about an issue like retraining, or any issue for that matter. The first is you can talk at each other. You also have the choice of talking with each other. You can decide to focus on the past, or you can choose to focus on the future. You can try and talk about who's right, decide that issue. Or you can try and talk about what are you going to do about it, what's to be done. You can blame each other, or you can jointly tackle the problem. You can try and score points at each other, or you can clarify your interests and try and invent some options. Now, if I were to ask you in the last 20 minutes talking about this issue, where have you spent your time, on this side of the line or that side of the line?
I think it's self-evident.
Self-evident. This way has produced two options for you: rigid seniority and management discretion. Before taking any decisions, you want to have as many options on the table as possible. Now, in order to invent options, we need to back up and clarify the interests that those options need to serve. Now, let's take a look at interests. On the union side, we've got interests in maintaining job security, rewarding loyalty, upholding precedents, and satisfying constituents. On the management side, we've identified efficient use of resources, flexibility on the shop floor, satisfying the board, and investing for long term. As you look at these interests, do you see any shared interests, any overlap among these interests? Do you see any?
Bill, I think we have to admit as a union that the company over the years has been very fair to the employees. Certainly we don't agree with some of the things they've done, but they have tried to be fair with us.
Well, I think we also have an interest in this investment for the long term. We'd also like to have a well-skilled workforce.
Now, what's interesting is before you had two positions: seniority, company discretion. But if you unpack the underlying interests, it looks like there are some shared interests here. It looks like you might be able to invent an option here, to have as many options as possible so as then to make the decision. So can we spend some time talking about some other possible options that could meet both sides' interests in this situation?
Bill, as the president of this union, I have difficulty with that. We need to caucus ourselves before we get into anything like that.
Okay, Al, what I'm talking about is no commitment. There's no commitment on both sides. We're just talking about inventing options. No one's asking about making a decision here at the table. And if you feel more comfortable about it, we could do that separately. The union could go off by themselves. You could stay right here and I'll help you invent some possible options. You could then decide which ones you want to talk about with the other side, although there's still no decision. Management could do the same. We could get back together, talk about it. But remember, at this phase, there's no decision being made. All we're trying to do is put out some possible options so you can make the best possible decision.
And this union won't be committed.
And the union won't be committed.
No, will management.
Nor will management.
Fine, sure.
We'll try. Want to try? Okay. And remember, your mandate here is to come up with options that satisfy your interests, but also you think the other side could live with too. Options that satisfy both sides' interests, with no commitment whatsoever. Okay? No attribution, no commitment.
Notice how Bill and Bruce backed up to clarify the interests of the parties before working on the inventing of those options that are designed to meet them. Mr. Warren's concern with inventing in front of the other side is serious and a real concern, a justified concern. People often understand an idea as an idea to which you're committed. So if you say, how about this, the other side may say, I accept. So it's quite important to make it very clear that you're not making commitments, and it's much easier to invent first in your own team, on your own side, generate ideas free from any concern of what the commitments are. Even there, and within your own team, it is hard to withhold judgment. We tend to think the purpose of any meeting is to agree. So when someone puts up an idea we don't like, we often shoot it down. But if we want a wide range of ideas, the purpose is to broaden the range of possibilities, broaden the scope, and not just look for the best one. The best one will be selected after we've got a lot of ideas on the table.
Other options?
I was thinking if we could somehow enhance the retirement package. Some of these people might volunteer to do some sort of early retirement.
Okay. What about some other options?
Why not try some kind of a mentor program? I mean, really utilize some of these senior people without making them feel like they're obsolete.
I'm not sure how some of my guys might feel about that, actually.
Okay, remember, Frank, we're just trying to get as many ideas as we can, no criticism. Let's just take a look at this mentor program.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about it.
Well, you pair up senior employees with
Yeah.
the less senior employees, have them work together for 3 months, say, per department, and then maybe change so they get different perspectives. I think that would give us a well-diversified, well-trained staff.
You know, at our last subcouncil meeting, your group said to us that they were very concerned about job security. And if we go on some of these, I think it endangers their job security. There's got to be a solution to that.
Right. But can you think of any way to improve on that?
You know what really would satisfy them is to give them some job guarantees.
Okay.
You know, right now, I think what worries them is we're talking about training younger people, and our fear is, of course, once they're trained, then they come to the 55, 60, 65-year-old guy and say, hey, buddy, we don't need you any longer. So we need some kind of, if management's willing to guarantee those people, why, we'll take a look at this kind of training.
That's a really good
That'll
idea.
take care of your people. So what I hear you saying, Al, is that if retraining means getting rid of some of the older people, that's one thing. If retraining means enhancing the job